The last thing you see is the needle. It is a fang of black, volcanic rock that rips a hole in the perfect, unforgiving blue of the Arizona sky. It is the spire of a cathedral built by a devil. It is the landmark that tells you that you are now leaving the world of men and entering a different kind of country. It is the summer of 1947. A man named James Cravey, a retired photographer from Oklahoma, stands at the foot of this needle, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He is not here to admire the view. He is here to die or to become a king. He checks the worn, sweat-stained map in his hand one last time. It is a copy of a copy, a ghost of a secret. It shows the needle. It shows a series of cryptic clues, a horse with its head down, a rock shaped like a human face, a cave. And it shows an X that marks the spot of the most seductive and deadliest treasure in American history. The lost Dutchman gold mine. Cravey is not a fool. He knows the stories. He knows this mountain, this jagged, sun-blasted labyrinth called the Superstition Wilderness, is a graveyard. It is littered with the bones of men just like him, men who came here with a map and a dream. Men who were swallowed by the heat, by the canyons, by the ghosts. But Cravey is different. He is certain. He has spent years of his life and his entire life savings on this one last gamble. He believes he has solved the riddle. He has found the one true map. As he takes his first step into the shadow of the needle, into a canyon that the Apache believe is the gateway to the lower world, he is not just a prospector. He is a supplicant. He is a man making a pilgrimage to a cursed altar. He is walking into a story that has been written, chapter by bloody chapter, for over 100 years. A story of unimaginable wealth, of madness, and of a mountain that eats men for breakfast. Part 2, The Whisper of a Dying German. Forget the cheerful, romanticized tales of the California gold rush. Forget the image of the lucky prospector panning for glittering dust in a clear mountain stream. The legend of the lost Dutchman is not a story of luck. It is a story of a curse. It is a dark, gothic fable that grew out of the very rock and heat of the Arizona desert. It is a story that has more in common with a horror novel than a history book. The myth begins not with a beginning, but with an ending. It begins in a small adobe house in Phoenix in the year 1891. An old, cantankerous German prospector named Jacob Waltz is on his deathbed. Dutchman was the frontier slang for any German immigrant. Waltz was a ghost, a recluse who had spent decades wandering the Superstition Mountains, a place most sane men avoided. He was a man who by all accounts should have been dirt poor, and yet he always seemed to have money. He would pay for his supplies not with coins, but with small buckskin pouches filled with chunks of unbelievably rich, rose-colored gold ore. Gold so pure it looked like it had been melted and poured into the rock. He never told anyone where he got it. For 30 years, the source of his gold was the great, agonizing mystery of the Arizona territory. And now he was dying. The story goes that in his final, delirious hours, he was cared for by a neighbor, a woman named Julia Thomas. And as a final act of gratitude, he whispered the secret to her. He didn't draw her a map. He gave her a riddle, a set of verbal clues, a mental map to a place of impossible wealth. He told her to look for the needle. He told her to find the setting sun in the eye of the horse. He told her that the mine was under the shadow of the military trail. And then he died. He left behind a shoebox full of the beautiful, strange gold ore under his bed. And he left behind a mystery that would ignite a fire of greed and obsession that is still burning to this day. Julia Thomas and her brother spent the rest of their lives and their fortunes searching for the mine. They never found it. The Dutchman's riddle had become the Dutchman's curse. Part 3. The map carved in blood. To understand why a man like James Cravey would bet his life on this story, you have to understand that the legend of the Dutchman is not just one story. It is 1,000 stories, all tangled together like a nest of rattlesnakes. And the oldest, darkest strand of that story does not begin with a German prospector. It begins with a Mexican family and a massacre. It begins with the Peraltas. Long before Jacob Waltz ever set foot in Arizona in the 1840s, the legend says that the wealthy Peralta family from Sonora, Mexico, operated a fantastically rich gold mine deep in the Superstition Mountains. This was Apache land. The most sacred and fiercely guarded land of the Apache people. For the Peraltas, this was an act of trespass. For the Apache, it was an act of sacrilege. The story culminates in a final, desperate attempt by the Peraltas to haul one last, massive shipment of gold back to Mexico. They loaded a train of 200 mules. They were deep in a canyon just miles from their mine when the Apache struck. The ambush was not a battle. It was an extermination. The Apache warriors, silent and invisible on the canyon rims, rained down a storm of arrows and bullets. Every member of the Peralta party was killed. The mules, laden with their sacks of gold, were either killed or scattered into the wilderness. The treasure was lost, absorbed back into the mountain. The Apache, the story goes, then sealed the mine and called upon their thunder god to protect it. They placed a curse on the land. Anyone who came searching for the Peralta gold would meet the same fate. They would die in the rock, and their ghosts would join the spirits of the slaughtered Mexicans as eternal guardians of the treasure. This story, the story of the Peralta massacre, is the bedrock of the entire lost Dutchman legend. It is the original sin, and it is the source of the most tantalizing and most dangerous artifacts in the Dutchman mythology, the Peralta stone maps. These are a series of strange, tablet-like stones discovered over the years in the desert, carved with a complex and cryptic set of symbols, lines, and clues. They show hearts, crosses, priests, and horses. They are believed by many to be the original coded maps to the family's lost mine. They are a puzzle written in the language of blood and stone. And Jacob Waltz, the legend insists, was the one man who had somehow deciphered them. He hadn't found a new mine. He had simply rediscovered the old, cursed mine of the Peraltas. The treasure he found was not just gold. It was a treasure soaked in the blood of two cultures. Part 4. A pilgrimage to the graveyard. The death of Jacob Waltz did not end the story. It began the gold rush, but this was not like any other gold rush. It was not a rush of thousands of hopeful miners. It was a slow, steady, and often secret pilgrimage of true believers, men who called themselves Dutch hunters. They were a strange and obsessive breed, a fraternity of men who dedicated their lives to solving the Dutchman's riddle. They were not just prospectors. They were detectives, historians, and cryptographers. They spent their lives in libraries, poring over old Spanish archives, and in the field, hiking the brutal, unforgiving canyons of the superstitions. And the mountain began to kill them. The list of men who went into the superstitions looking for the Dutchman's gold and never came out is long and chilling. In 1896, two prospectors, Thomas and Haught, claimed to have found the mine. They returned to Phoenix with rich ore. Haught's partner died shortly after, and Haught himself was later found dead, a bullet hole in his head. In the 1910s, a man named Elisha Rivas, the madman of the superstitions, lived as a hermit in the mountains. Was found dead, his head nearly severed from his body. And then most famously, there was the story of Adolf Ruth. In 1931, the 78-year-old amateur prospector went into the mountains with a map he claimed was an original Peralta map. 6 months later, his skull was found with two bullet-like holes in it. His headless body was discovered a month after that, almost a mile away. The map was gone. These stories, and dozens like them, did not deter the Dutch hunters. They did the opposite. Each death was not a warning. It was proof. It was confirmation that the mine was real and that its secret was so valuable that men were willing to kill for it. The Superstition Mountains became a graveyard, and the ghosts of the dead became the guardians of the legend. To go into those mountains was to consciously step into a story where the odds of a violent, mysterious death were statistically, terrifyingly high. It was a place where the line between treasure hunting and suicide became almost impossibly thin. And into this graveyard in the summer of 1947, James Cravey decided to walk. Part 5. The camera and the curse. James Cravey was not your typical grizzled, uneducated prospector. He was a man of the modern world, a retired photographer, a man who believed in evidence, in details, in the power of observation. He was not a man to be easily fooled by campfire stories. And that is what made him so dangerous to himself. He was a rational man who had fallen completely, utterly in love with an irrational obsession. He had spent years and a small fortune acquiring his map, a map he believed was the key that connected the Peralta stones to the Dutchman's verbal clues. He was convinced he had solved the puzzle that had baffled men for half a century. His plan was meticulous. He would not go in alone. He hired a young local prospector named William Ferguson to be his guide and his partner. But even before they entered the mountains, the curse seemed to be at work. Their preparations were plagued by a series of strange and unsettling events. Their pack animals spooked for no reason. A local Apache man they tried to hire as a guide took one look at their map, his eyes wide with terror, and simply walked away, refusing to speak to them. The old-timers at the local saloon warned them. They told Cravey that he was too old, that the summer heat would kill him. They told him the mountain didn't want him there. Cravey dismissed it all as superstition. He was a man of logic. He had a map. He had a plan. But the mountain has its own kind of logic, and the heat is a real and tangible enemy. By the time he and Ferguson established their base camp deep within the labyrinth of canyons, the temperature was soaring to 115 degrees in the shade. The rocks themselves seemed to hum with a malevolent heat. The water in their canteens grew warm and tasted of tin. The silence was absolute, broken only by the buzz of flies and the sound of their own labored breathing. They were miles from any help, two small, soft-bodied creatures in a world of hard, hot stone. The mountain was watching them, and it was waiting. Before we follow Cravey and Ferguson on their final, fatal push into the heart of the mystery, I want you to take a moment. The Legend of the Lost Dutchman is a story about the terrifying power of obsession. If you find value in these deep dives into the dark corners of human nature and history, please take a moment to subscribe. We are dedicated to telling the stories that reveal the truths that lie buried beneath the myths. Part 6. The last photograph, the story of what happened to James Cravey and William Ferguson, is a story pieced together from shadows, from whispers, and from one final, haunting piece of evidence. In late June of 1947, a search party went into the superstitions. Cravey and Ferguson were long overdue. The searchers found their base camp. It was neat, orderly. It did not look like the camp of men in distress. It looked like the camp of men who had just stepped away for a moment. But a closer look revealed a series of disturbing clues. Cravey's diary was there. The last entry was cryptic, speaking of being close, of the excitement being almost too much to bear. But the men were gone. The search party fanned out, following their tracks deeper into the canyons. The trail led them into a region of the mountains known for its treacherous terrain and its association with the darkest parts of the Dutchman legend, a place of narrow canyons and hidden caves. And then they found him. They found the body of James Cravey. He was not in a canyon. He was lying in the open on a high exposed ridge, as if he had been trying to signal for help. The cause of death was obvious. Dehydration and exposure. The brutal, unforgiving sun had claimed him, but there was something strange. His head had been removed from his body. It was lying several feet away, propped up against a rock, as if it had been deliberately placed there. And his gear was gone. His pack, his canteen, his rifle, and most importantly, his map. There was no sign of William Ferguson. He had vanished. The immediate conclusion was obvious and chilling. The younger, stronger man had murdered his elderly partner, taken the map, and made off with the treasure. Ferguson became the subject of a massive manhunt, but he was a ghost. He had disappeared into the mountains as completely as the Dutchman's gold itself. The story seemed to have found its next villain. A killer had been added to the curse, but the story had one more twist. Weeks later, another search party, exploring a different part of the mountains, found Cravey's camera. It was lying in the dust, but it was intact. They took it back to Phoenix and had the film developed. The photographs were a ghostly record of Cravey's final days. There were pictures of the landscape of their camp, of the landmarks on his map. And then there was the last photograph on the roll. It was a picture of William Ferguson, his partner. He was standing at the entrance to a small cave or mine opening. He was smiling, a triumphant, joyous smile. He was holding up a piece of rock. It was a piece of white quartz, shot through with a thick, unmistakable vein of gold. It was the Dutchman's ore. The photograph was the proof. They had found it. The curse was real, and it had found them. Part 7, The Ghost of the Canyon. The discovery of the photograph turned the case on its head. It changed the story from a simple murder into something far more complex and terrifying. What happened in that canyon after that photograph was taken? The official investigation eventually concluded that there had been no murder. The medical examiner determined that Cravey's head had likely been removed by wild animals after his death. The most plausible theory was that both men, in the delirious excitement of their discovery, had made a fatal mistake. They had pushed too far, stayed too long, and had run out of water. They had become victims not of a human killer, but of the mountain itself. Ferguson, they concluded, had likely wandered off in a delirious haze, and his body was simply never found, consumed by the vast, unforgiving wilderness. But the legend does not accept such simple, rational explanations. The legend prefers the ghost. The Dutch hunters have a different theory. They believe that Cravey and Ferguson were not alone in that canyon. They believed they were being watched. They believed that they had stumbled into the territory of a silent, shadowy guardian of the mine. A modern-day prospector, or perhaps a descendant of the Apache who had taken it upon himself to protect the secret. In this version of the story, after the photograph was taken, this guardian revealed himself. He killed both men, hid Ferguson's body, took the map and the gold, and staged the scene to look like an accident. He was the ghost of the canyon, the latest incarnation of the curse. This theory, while it sounds like fiction, has a chilling resonance. Because the story of James Cravey was not the last. The mountain continued to kill. In the decades that followed, more men would disappear. In the 1950s, 2 men from Texas vanished. In the 1960s, a woman from Utah went in and never came out. The Superstition Mountains became a Bermuda Triangle of the desert, a place where the normal rules of the world did not seem to apply. The story of James Cravey became a cautionary tale, a foundational text in the Bible of the Dutch hunters. He was the man who had the proof in his hands. He had the photograph, and all it had gotten him was a headless grave in the middle of nowhere. Part 8. The weight of the unseen gold. The lost Dutchman mine is not a place. It is a story. It is a story that we, as human beings, seem to need to tell. It is a story about the eternal conflict between our desire for wealth and our fear of the unknown. It is a story about the seductive power of a secret and the deadly price of obsession. The gold itself is almost irrelevant. In all these years, no verifiable piece of the Dutchman's ore has ever been brought to market. The mine, if it exists, has remained a perfect secret. But the legend is more powerful than any physical treasure. The legend is what draws the hunters. They are not just searching for gold. They are searching for meaning. They are searching for a connection to a wilder, more mysterious past. They are searching for the answer to a riddle that has consumed the lives of men for over a century. The story of James Cravey is the perfect parable for this quest. He was a modern man, a man of cameras and evidence who tried to apply logic to a legend. And the legend destroyed him. He proved that you cannot map a myth. You cannot photograph a ghost. The Superstition Mountains are now a protected wilderness area. Prospecting is largely illegal, but the Dutch hunters still go. They go quietly, secretly, drawn by a force they cannot explain. They are searching for a hole in the ground, but what they are really searching for is a hole in our understanding of the world, a place where the unbelievable might just be true. The lost Dutchman mine is the great, unanswered question of the American West. It is a story that has no ending. And that is why it will never die. It is a treasure made not of gold, but of pure, uncut, and deadly mystery. And it is guarded not by a curse, but by the bleached bones of the men who tried to solve it.